Welcome to Building Fortunes Radio. Make sure you check us out at buildingfortunesradio.com. Along with our marketing partners, we're here to help our PM Marketing Network Leads customers build their businesses and make the world a better place. At Building Fortunes, we know how much your business means to you and the people important to you. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world. Now on to our show with your host, Peter Mingils.
Hello everyone, Peter Mingils here. You're listening to Building Fortunes Radio, and one of my very favorite segments is our MLM After Hours segments, where we talk about Building Fortunes Radio, we talk about things that are happening in the news, and we talk about things that are happening, period. The good, the bad, the everything, because I think if you're going to succeed in any industry, you have to know the ropes, and you have to understand the backdrop of the things that are happening, and also you have to watch out who you talk to. Or who you listen to, or what information you're exposed to. So we do this radio show at 5 p.m. to come up with different and various topics, and I've had a really nice collection of guest speakers recently that have been able to kind of share with us some additional information that we usually don't talk about relative to network marketing or home-based businesses. And although some of it, to me, is critical information, critical meaning it might have a negative spin to it, it's also very important information because you have to understand the rules. So my background was in direct sales and direct sales management. And I realized that there's the academic way of doing things, and then there's the real way of doing things, like how business really works here. And sometimes they blend, and sometimes it's important for you to know, and all the time it's going to hurt you if you're ignorant. So on this radio show, I've invited Dave Ritchie, and we have Roger Van Vlissingen that sometimes shows up. We've even had Mr. Robert Fitzpatrick, and then also E. Robert Smith. And these gentlemen are grounded in their belief of the good and the bad things related to our industry, so we get a chance to kind of shoot those out for those people like me that are looking for confirmation, if you will, of what we suspect, but we're probably not being told. So I'll use as an example. I grew up in a family where it was kind of like, you kept stuff from the kids. You didn't have mature conversations with the kids because they were kids. They had brains that probably couldn't function the same way an adult would. Kids don't need to hear about adult problems, and it was always lots of times, whoops, the kids walked in the room and then it would be quiet. Now, I think that's a parental management style that's pretty good. Kids don't need to know about terrorisms, if you will, or they may not need to know about every sex that might be out there or every other challenge that might be out there. So I understand you got to kind of keep some information away from the kids. But if you're here on Building Fortunes Radio, more than less likely you're an entrepreneur that's trying to figure it out and make it, and you need to hear some of the things that we talk about. So we're going to explore some of those areas again today. And we introduced Dave Ritchie on our last couple of calls, and he's got a really, it's not a great story. It's a good example, because the story has a downside to it. So from that perspective, it's not a good story at all. But it's a realistic story, which means it's kind of good for us to learn from, I suppose, might be the only way I could probably cushion that in here. And he's joining us today to also kind of give us some feedback on some other things that are happening in our industry as well. So, David, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, like where you're from, a little bit of a backdrop, and then anything you'd like to add, and then we'll move into this week's topics.
Good afternoon, Peter. I have quite a extensive background in network marketing. From a peripheral perspective, that involved involvement in administrative capacities with distributor support networks and personal experience with a domestic partner who was deeply involved in the industry. And since the outflows of those involvements came home to roost, I've become very active in speaking against the abuses that some of these companies engage in.
Excellent. And if you want to hear a little bit more about David's story, check out buildingfortunesradio.com. find the MLM After Hours segment and then find something with his name associated with, so you can hear, if you will, the specific avenue that he had been exposed to and some of the things that happened, and also the tragic end result of one of the situations as well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening in the news now. And David, I don't know if you have anything in particular you want me to kick it off, but there's two real big issues that we're hearing about that are literally happening right now, and that'll have ramifications in our industry, good or bad, depending on what side you're on. And I think a lot of people will never hear about it from their upline, because their upline and their corporation, that they're working with, are a little bit more like my parents and my family, using that analogy relative to how they treated the kids. The kids don't need to hear about these things. The kids don't need to know about any of these things, would be the typical things, and that's the way uplines and corporations sometimes treat their whole entire downline. Now, I've run businesses before, and I can share with you, I know where that philosophy is applicable and probably very smart. There's a lot of people, sometimes the newest ones. There's a lot of people, sometimes the stupid ones. There's a lot of people, sometimes the less sophisticated ones. A lot of people, sometimes those that are indifferent and just don't care, and they don't need to hear this stuff. So for those people, keep them out of the room. For this crowd, we're going to talk about two things specifically. One of them is about Roger Van Vlissingen and the points that he's bringing up that I believe he'll be back next week to talk about, and that's the senator in the state of New York City who's really going after Herbalife. So I think we're going to put this up on, we'll put this up on Building Fortunes Radio maybe, but we'll definitely put this up on MLM.news. So we have a domain name called MLM.news, and you'll want to go there because you'll find this article there with Roger's permission. If he gives me permission, I'll put it there. But on December 9th, in the Bronx, which is where Roger is, and I guess one of the districts where the senator is, they will be having like a town hall meeting of sorts where they talk about stuff relative to Herbalife. And basically, I guess it's like a mastermind principle of, hey, listen, do you feel that you were abused by the company? Do you feel you were misled by somebody that was bringing you in? Do you think these nutrition company or these nutrition clubs are doing things the right way? So it really is, for lack of a better expression, I don't know how to call it, not like a witch hunt, but it's definitely an exploratory committee, if you will, to talk about some of the challenges that Herbalife is now alleged to be facing relative to the way they do their nutrition clubs. So anybody that's ever been investigating the industry, we all realize that sometimes you go to these opportunity meetings and things that people say are not said the right way. Sometimes they're innocently said in a stupid fashion. Sometimes they're maliciously said in a stupid fashion. And our industry seems to be a great place for narcissists, sociopaths or sociopaths, people that are overly greedy, people that are just dumb and stupid, because there's no license or test that someone has to pass to be a network marketer. Your only qualifications for a network marketer is that your credit card clears. And that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but that's really it. To be a doctor, you have to go to school and get certified. To be an attorney, you have to do the same thing, kind of go to school and get certified, maybe even have some level of continuing occupation. But in MLM, hey, you pay your dues or you get a check and we'll give you a microphone. That's the way it kind of goes. And there's some things that are coming to roost, I think, and Herbalife is going to be one of those examples. Here's the defining moment. Herbalife is not like Vima. Vima is a privately held company, and they kind of live in their own little space, and nobody really pays attention to them. Herbalife, on the other hand, is on the New York Stock Exchange, and it is a multi-billion-dollar company. And they have people from great reputations from Wall Street who have invested in Herbalife stock. So if there is something that happens about Herbalife, other people's reputations are going to be tarnished as a result of their association with this, which probably is going to mean sometime in the future that certain people or businesses will not want to have anything to do with our industry of MLM or home-based businesses. So there's some things happening. They're happening locally. They happen to be happening with somebody who is going probably to be there. So Roger Van Vlissingen will be an active person in that audience at that December 9th meeting in the Bronx, New York, of this year. So he's going to be able to give us his feedback towards what happened, and we're watching history in the making, because we do know that once one party or state does something, it usually is kind of carried over by several others, especially with those that have challenges in that industry. And Herbalife is something that's kind of interesting because they use a lot of affinity marketing. Now, what does that mean? That means just people of like-minded cultures have a tendency to be the ones that are targeted, if you will. So, in this example, there's a lot of people from the Latino community, a lot of people that speak Spanish that are in Bronx that are now being or have been targeted, if you will, and therefore Herbalife is being suggested that they are picking on or preying upon the Latino community. So affinity marketing is something that we're going to talk about on the next section of what we have over here. But I want David, if David, you want to throw in any comments about Herbalife or whatever you might know about this situation to jump in there, you certainly can.
Okay. Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
One thing I'd like to do is just back up to last week, just a moment, to my story. One thing that I didn't make clear that I think is key in the preface to the story is that my domestic partner and I had known each other and been close friends since college 32 years earlier. So I didn't just jump into her life for no reason. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Right. So you didn't meet her in an opportunity meeting. You met her many years before this.
No, and I would never have been in an opportunity meeting had it not been for her.
Okay.
Regarding Herbalife, I think there are a lot of issues at play that are interlocking. One thing I run into all the time is that why are the DOJ, SEC, and FTC investigations taking so long? Well, some people think that that's because the Herbalife settlement is already in place. Well, the VEMA case shows that that's not true. The FTC doesn't engage in settlement negotiations until after they've filed for injunctive relief. So that one doesn't fly. One thing that also gets missed is that while the FTC's ambit is only within the United States, activities that take place in the United States, the DOJ's reach is international. And all you have to do is look at the FIFA, the soccer international sanctioning group that the DOJ just reached into Europe to make arrests to see how important that is. So there's a lot in play. The FTC has a really huge tent that involves far more than direct sales, and to expect the FTC to quickly grasp what the issues really are, I think, is unrealistic. So all in all, I think the extended investigation only bodes ill for Herbalife's future.
Right, okay. Exactly. Well, that's good. I'll let you finish. Keep going.
No, that's okay. I was pretty much out of steam.
Okay. So the scenario there is this isn't only a MLM issue. The Department of Justice is going against bad players in all different types of industries as well. Soccer,
yes.
That has nothing to do with MLM, besides, some companies sponsor soccer teams, but that's just an aside. So the Department of Justice is very active. And by the way, if you start to think about it, if you were a Department of Justice person and you're going after soccer guys for this kind of fraud, internal people for this kind of fraud, because there's been internal challenges with investigators with Bitcoin, the dark web, stocks, other types of Ponzi schemes, all of a sudden MLM is just another client. It's not like they might be going after the MLM industry. They're going after industries in general with questionable or bad players, and they don't need to really understand all the intricacies the way you think. If you're in MLM, they understand these things. They don't. This for them is just another, and I'm using an exaggeration here because I know this is not 100% accurate, but this is just one more file on somebody's desk of somebody's assignment for this week. So they're treating all these Ponzi schemes, pyramid schemes, all of these crookedness, if you will, kind of like the same bad players. So they just kind of go after them with the same kind of approach, and those approaches are pretty harsh. So to kind of make that transition relative to what I just said, and David, if you want to jump in, clean up anything that I said, you certainly can. So at any time, just interrupt me and I'll stop speaking. This has become pretty... Yes, go ahead.
Regarding the DOJ's involvement, the FBI is also investigating Herbalife. The FBI only investigates criminal matters, and to put together a criminal case has a much higher standard of proof than to put together a civil regulatory case like might ordinarily be filed against Herbalife. I think that's one reason why the investigation is taking so long, too.
Right. Exactly. So let's kind of just make a little bit of a transition to some of the things that are happening right now. There's a company called Telex Free, who I didn't follow a lot, mostly because they were mostly international. I have a tendency to focus with a lot of our customers and the people that we talk to here in the United States. But they are really big, especially in the Brazilian-American area. But again, it's Spanish-speaking mostly, so we don't really talk a lot about those types of things because most of my customers, it would be a topic that would be not as applicable. But Telex Free is, without a doubt, setting a precedent in a very scary way right now. So I want to give credit where credit is due. So I was reading an article on patrickpritty.com. So if you go to www.patrickpritty.com, I want to give him, if it's a him, and that's a stage name, just so you know. So I want to give him the credit that he deserves because he did the legwork and put up some investigation stuff, and I don't agree with some of the things that he states, but I want to give him credit for at least this article. So what he did was he recently posted a legal podcast from another gentleman, you'll see when you go to the site, talking about the legal ramifications of what's happening with Telex Free, having nothing really to do with the MLM side, everything to do with the banking side. So let me draw the connections for those people listening in. Network marketing companies need banks. Banks are getting pummeled for relationships they have with bad players. Therefore, banks may stop dealing with MLM because, now this isn't like a 100% trend, but they're going to be cautious with dealing with MLM companies because they don't want to deal with what they are dealing right now with Telex Free. So what happens is once a business is either alleged or accused or found to be guilty of being a Ponzi or a pyramid scheme or some kind of fraudulent activity, there's a receiver that comes in many times having nothing to do with whether this thing is proven in court. But he starts or she starts, or more than less likely, their whole entire team starts trying to recover assets that were given to this Ponzi scheme. So let me use as an example relative to a gentleman named Sanford. Alan Sanford ran a very large Ponzi scheme having nothing to do with network marketing. However, because it was a Ponzi scheme and he's facing jail time, the banks that allowed him to perpetuate this are now being pummeled, if you will, by the Department of Justice and the SEC and everybody else on the planet for fines. And in this one specific example for Alan Stanford, J.P. Morgan is now charged with $2.5 billion of civil and criminal penalties to resolve this turning a blind eye on this massive Ponzi scheme related to J.P. Morgan. This one's in relationship to Bernie Madoff's case. So J.P. Morgan is paying a huge price because of J.P. Morgan. Okay, now let me get into Sanford. The receiver is also going after the Golf Channel. So you would say, excuse me, $6 million to the Golf Channel? Why? Well, the Golf Channel ran some advertisements and commercials and some events for this Sanford guy. And now the Golf Channel is, fighting back and forth of not wanting to or having to give back the $6 million. So if you start to take a look at the growing trend, the banks are now going to be skeptical and hesitant in dealing with home-based businesses like MLM companies. The vendors, there's precedents right now that they're going after the Golf Channel. So think about this. Are they going to go after the host of the software? Are they going to start to go after the Marriott Hotel where you had the event itself? Who knows where the bottom is in this argument? But what is happening right now with Telex Free, based on this article that you can read and the audio you can listen to, is there's stuff happening right now with Telex Free, which was a network marketing company, that is really impacting the banking business because they are trying to make the banks that deal with these bad players responsible for allowing those bad players to exist. And for all of us that are listening in, you might not be able to connect the dots to say, well, why is this the case? How does this affect me? And the answer is it will ultimately. Some companies won't be able to get bank accounts or merchant accounts to be able to take credit cards. Some will wind up starting to pay increased rates. On a personal note, I just got a love note from my credit card processor that although we have almost zero ever chargebacks, and although we are probably a model customer for them, like if every business was like my business, they would never have any challenge, they just wrote me a rate that, Peter, sorry, we're going to start charging you, who just happens to be a customer of ours, 0.85% more in January than we were doing before, because we've seen an increase in our charges or our business operations. So me, the model merchant, is going to start being charged almost 1% more for being able to have the privilege of saying we take MasterCard or Visa. So do you think that's going to affect you if you're in an MLM company? Now, remember, I'm the model customer, and I might be a little bit naive to think that, but a business that does business and has almost no chargebacks to a credit card company, who always has money in the account for them to take out all their fees, I think would be considered the model customer. So for me being the model customer for almost 20 years, I can't imagine my credit card company saying, we just decided that we want to give you an arbitrary price increase. No, there's stuff that happens in the industry, and unfortunately the poor schmucks like me get stuck in the middle. So the guy that's doing the right thing always is the one who pays for the people that are doing the wrong things. There's a little bit of venting. But the reality is going to be is that there are charges that are happening on my behalf, and I'm like the model customer. Well, what about your MLM company? What about them? Are they going to have some challenges with increased rates as a result of some of these issues? Are they going to have some challenges with getting credit card or merchant accounts? And what's this going to mean? So I know I heard a door swing open, which means David might have had to leave. So David, are you still here?
I'm still here.
Okay, good. So I heard a door swing, and you said you might have a little bit of an interruption, so I figured you might still be here or gone. But those are some of the things that are happening in our industry that I just wanted to address that will be modifying or changing our industry somewhere down the line. So over and back to you.
Peter, you've done a great job of explaining how the tentacles of unfair and deceptive business practices extend throughout industry, and that's also true of society in general. And the destructive aspects of this are so insidious that it's really hard for anyone to recognize their true cause. And your show is one way that people can understand that, because you do a great job of explaining it. I don't know anything at all about the banking industry, but I do know that even in civil cases, those tentacles extend very far under the doctrine of deep pockets. So it's really something that consumers should sit up and take notice of.
Right. So other parts of this trend, if you will. So remember, a receiver that takes over the company's assets is a little bit like God. So now don't take that out of the religious context. But he's a little bit like the king or God, and he has powers almost like a superhuman to be able to go after whoever he wants to go after. And usually there's a judge with more like a big approve stamp than a disapprove stamp. So his approve stamp is well oiled and ready to go because that's why they appointed the receiver. So now the receiver's job is to find the money, a little bit like a dog sniffing in a drug place. So he's got to find the money. So where does he go? He goes to the Golf Channel because the Golf Channel has the money. He goes to the banks because the banks have the money. And then when the receiver says to the banks, well, you were letting these people go through, the bank says, well, that's what we do. We make money on all the fees associated with this. They say, do you really KYC? They even call it KYC. Do you know your customer or do you know your client? And you should have known your customer or should have known your client. So because you didn't, you're negligent. Oh, and by the way, since you have a lot of money anyway, we're going after you. So the receiver has this huge power to go after banks because they have the money, vendors, if you will now, the Golf Channel because they have the money. Even in the Zeke Rewards case, they're doing a class action lawsuit against the net winners, the people that the receiver said were profitable at $1,000 level. They are going after now the net winners. So there's 9,100 somewhat people in the United States, if they haven't settled already, that are going to be seeing, envelopes from legal services show up on their doorstep saying that you owe this money. If the court-appointed attorney can't beat the case. So he's got a huge whopping $35,000 from the receiver to do a defense fund for 9,100 people in this class action lawsuit against net winners. Do you suspect there will be a net winners case against the net winners from Telex Free? You can bet. Absolutely. Telex Free is potentially the... Go ahead. Go ahead, David.
I'm sorry, Peter. There's another aspect of the Zeke Rewards case that is, I think, extremely relevant and is going to have a chilling effect on legal representation as well, and that is that the receiver is also going after the attorney that represented Zeke Rewards.
Correct. And that's a great point because they went after Kevin Grimes and then also by extension Spencer Reese for Grimes and Reese. That court case was already settled, so I'm sure he took a pound of flesh from Kevin Grimes and Spencer Reese, but I'm sure the insurance company, which they had to have, probably paid the bulk amount of that. The settlement, I'm sure, if somebody kind of dug in a little bit and did a little bit of forensics, was probably a little bit more than the insurance because he wanted to get his pound of flesh from Kevin Grimes and from also Spencer Reese, so it hurt. Then he's going after Jerry Nera and Richard Walk. There's the suspicious, surprising, conspiratorial thing about Jerry Nera and Richard Walk is that Jerry Nera and Richard Walk were also attorneys for ASD. Jerry Nera and Richard Walk were also attorneys for Zeke Rewards. And if I completed my sentence, guess who also they were attorneys for? Telex Free. So if you're an attorney in an MLM, a pretty tough place to be earning a living right now when the government is then extending whatever's going on with the company with the attorneys as well. Then also the tax attorney, Howard Kaplan. Howard Kaplan was really a contract worker. The Zeke Rewards people asked him for tax advice. Now, I have to give you disclosure for those people that are listening in. I was a paid, let me say that the right way, highly underpaid consultant for Zeke Rewards. so I just have to make sure I
We're
stress
all underpaid, aren't we?
Yes,
we're
like
all
really
underpaid, aren't we, Peter?
Yes. So the way that story went is that a friend of ours, who is, by the way, pled guilty, which is another whole conversation, Dawn Wright Oliveris, was invited by me with her owner, Paul Burks, and her compliance gentleman, Greg Caldwell, and a few other people from their home office to attend a meeting of an organization I was president of at the time. It's called the Association of Network Marketing Professionals. My job was to make sure we had people at the convention, and Zeke Rewards was doing an amazing job at that time of attracting a lot of attention. So I asked Dawn, who I had a relationship with, meaning like she bought some leads from us a long time ago, and she had asked me if we would want to join Zeke Rewards. I knew about the penny auction before it was even done. She says, what do you think about penny auctions? So anyway, that's the long-winded kind of convolution. So I have to tell you that I have some tentacles into the Zeke Rewards thing. But in reference to the Zeke Rewards thing, the tax attorney was basically asked, so how do we do our 1099s? And he made a decision that, by the way, if there were, I'm not a tax attorney, but I have common sense. And I have spoken to enough people and done enough stuff with taxes where I consider myself somewhat competent in at least this general information. If you would, so I'll make a bet, like we'll do a pinky bet. If you add 1,000 fully qualified attorneys given the same question and asked for the course of action that they were supposed to do with the Zeke Rewards situation, I can do a pinky bet that 100% of those 1,000 fully qualified attorneys would have given the same answer that Howard Kaplan did. So Howard Kaplan is being sued for the tax advice that he gave that everybody else on the planet would have, which is very perplexing. So again, I'm not a tax accountant, never promised to be one, don't make any challenges being told. I could be totally incompetent in everything I'm saying next, but I have a pretty good feeling that if everybody was given the same exact quiz, unlike if they were asked to do your return, you know how the government always says, or people says, you know, you can give the same 1,000 attorneys the same basic account, and you're probably going to get 17 different answers, or 27 different answers from those 1,000 different attorneys. Like nobody can figure out the tax code. In the Zeke Rewards case, 1,000 out of 1,000 of them would have came back to the same answer that Howard Kaplan did, and that man is being sued by that receiver for $100 million. A little bit of showboating there, I'm guessing. And no end in sight or news about what's happening with that case as well. So what is the precedent here? Like you had just brought to light, David, they're going after the banks. So I talked about them going after the banks. Who else are they going after? They're going after the people that were vendors, the Golf Channel. They're going after the attorneys. They're going after the distributors. If someone is associated with a business, right or wrong, proven or not, questionable at least, they might find themselves in a world of hurt in reference to their reputation, their business practices, or any of the other things that might be happening relative to the world. So I appreciate you tying this back in with attorneys as well, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening that is making it harder for people, the good ones in our industry, to do business without paying the penalties of the bad players. So I'll let you punctuate whatever you want to punctuate there.
There's a tertiary consequence regarding in the legal realm that should be considered as well, and that is that an attorney without professional liability coverage is a paralyzed attorney. He can't afford to take any case. And what could very well happen is if these insurance companies have to pay large enough settlements, they may write exclusions into their professional liability coverage that prevent attorneys from representing similar companies or deny coverage at all.
Correct. So and I always
that puts attorneys in a world of hurt in and of itself.
Correct, because attorneys are then going to be told you can be an attorney, but you can't be an MLM attorney.
Exactly.
and that would have some ramifications. So what are the ramifications, you might say, Peter? What do you think? So I look at life being a little bit like a water balloon that's only partially filled, so there's more room to wiggle. Like if you blow up a water balloon that's so inflated with water and you touch it, it pops. But we've all had the experience of having a water balloon that wasn't fully inflated, and when you squeeze in one area, it kind of wiggles out another. So if you kind of squeeze it, you could just imagine that it'll just kind of still exist. It just will find another path to be able to exist. So what will that mean for us? That will mean the bad guys will still be bad guys. Let's just figure out a better way to do it. The good guys will be squeezed out of being in business. And unfortunately, the guy in the middle who still wants to play that game is going to feel the pressure. And unfortunately, people like me, David, I'm sure, people like our listening audience are the ones that usually feel the pressure and pay the price. The bad guys are good at being bad. For the most part, only a small fraction of them ever get caught. The guys that are super big, J.P. Morgan, do you really think $2.5 billion is going to affect J.P. Morgan? No. They'll just give more money to somebody else, and they won't give it to the little guy in the middle, because the little guy in the middle is, he's at risk, but they'll give it to somebody who can go buy a building or a country or whatever it might be at 0% interest and be able to, the banking industry goes. For them, $2.5 billion is just, it's a couple of decimal points. It's just a day's worth of, fictitious trading. It's whatever they want to do. No sweat off there. It's cost of doing business. But for the companies like, we're not going to touch MLM anymore because they're too dangerous. So whether you're an MLM attorney, whether you're a vendor, whether you're anybody, it's real simple to say, not really so sure about this. Now, is this hypothetical? Well, I got to give Ray Pacinley some credit for this. So we have a gentleman that we're associated with. His name is Ray Pacinley. He runs a company called Total Apps, and he's been on our MLM After Hours radio show. And he introduced, for a lot of us that don't know about these things, a thing called Operation Choke Point. So go do your searches, Google, DuckDuckGo, Fetch.news, wherever you're going to go to do your searches, and type in Operation Choke Point. And when you go to Operation Choke Point, you'll probably find that there are some high-risk businesses out there that banks are told, if you are playing with these people, if you are conducting business with these people, you are in a high-risk business and probably going to be investigated. So, for instance, if you sell bullets or guns, you're high risk. If you are doing gambling or anything associated with gambling, high risk. If you are in adult services, like escort services, you're probably high risk. If you are somebody who's in, get this, MLM, that's a high-risk business. The banks are throwing MLMers in the same sentences as bullets and guns and porn and gambling and dating sites and escort services, and you are right there. So, again, there's some things that are happening to tighten up this industry. Now, some people might say this is good, this is cleaning up the industry. And I might agree with those bad players, this is cleaning up the industry. But there's another portion, David, where the little guys, the ones that are trying to do it the right way, are just having a harder time doing business because they're being squozed in every direction. So over and back to you.
I think there's some underpinning issues with direct selling that have driven MLMs, the bad players, to bad practices. And that is that direct sales, by and large, unless you're talking about industrial products, direct sales is a supply-driven sales model. And that's counter-economic. So what happens is that these companies have to maladapt to that sales model in order to be profitable. And I believe that that's where all the abuses flow from. That said, you brought up some interesting points about where the bad players might turn. And one thing that I'm keeping a close eye on, because I think it's a very high likelihood, is there is a religious sect that has some markedly commercial interests that has gotten away with bypassing labor laws, fraud laws, unfair and deceptive business practice laws that I suspect the MLM industry, the bad players will turn to, and that's a religious model. And I'm keeping a close eye out for that and trying to craft my own work around that possibility in order to encompass that model as well as the direct sales model.
Now, in reference to the religious track, you would think that they would do that because it's just easier to have, like when you're working within the churches, I'm going to use church as an example, but when you're working within a church, you really are mostly working with local groups and mostly on your own. So it's just easier to defraud people if you're working with, is that the path that you're referencing or something else?
No, and I have nothing against churches.
Right.
This is a particular church. I think it'd probably be a bad idea to name it on air.
Right.
But the problem is that the exceptions are already built into the model. In other words, they don't have to meet the same requirements that a typical commercial enterprise does in terms of the fairness of their practices. So that sets them up as a slam dunk turn to model for scamsters.
Right. When I lived in New York, there were plenty of sections in the more downtrodden areas that had churches on retail storefronts, and you would probably say, this is a front for some other operation. So many times they might be used as fronts towards those types of things, which is another whole conversation. Okay, so I think we covered some pretty interesting things here that most people never, ever, ever think about. So there's some stuff that's happening in the world of banking, business, regulation, that are going to be affecting some people's worlds, and somehow or another, I would basically say, so can you maneuver around it? Can you still actually choose this industry to be one that you can actually make a living at? And the answer is, for the good guys, it's, here's my own editorial. For the good guys, there's always going to be a problem, meaning you're always going to feel like you're getting screwed one way or another. Sorry for the horrible analogy, but you will be. Your rates are going up. You're paying too much than you should have. Everybody's throwing all this extra caution in front of you. They treat you like a criminal before they give you any opportunity to really do things the right way. So if you're a solid business owner, you're trying to do things the right way, welcome to what it's like to work in an overregulated situation where there are bad players that screw it for everybody. But is it still possible? The answer is, there's a lot of mosquitoes and gnats out there, but it is still possible, but you better do it the right way because, not that the government or the regulators are ever going to catch all the bad players, but they certainly are catching some of the bigger ones. And as a result of that, it's making it harder for a lot of other people to do things. And then obviously, there's no strength and weakness. So the little motivational speech is when you know that if you have a distributor who's doing things the wrong way, you better step up because that is the one that's going to probably take you down. So you better do those types of things. There's no strength and weakness. So regardless of how many sales they might be bringing in or how big of an organization they might be able to bring over to your things, or regardless of how the money flow might be coming in, it's better to probably run a smaller, cleaner business than a massive business with question marks because you might lose everything, including your freedom, which might be happening with some of the people from Telex Free, will be happening with some of the people from Zeek Rewards and some other companies as well. So over and back to you, David. There's enough content for me on this one. We can wrap this up as a nice call, unless you want to add anything else.
Sure. Who knows what the FBI is going to turn up with Herbalife, but their entire focus is by policy in their commission to investigate criminal activity, and that entails criminal penalties, which include prison. So if I were sitting over there, I'd be real worried about what the FBI might find out. One thing that, and if I'm getting too far off track here, please stop.
No, you're fine. You're absolutely perfect.
Time has given the FTC a gift. that I hope they will soon recognize that would take the bad players out of the mix entirely and very quickly. And that is the issue of blinded recruitment. Recruiting scams never, ever disclose the extent of existing competition in a prospect's market, and they have that information readily at hand. Now that laptop computers have become affordable and internet access is so easy, there's absolutely no justification for that practice anymore. It's already illegal under the provisions of the FTC Act Section 5. So no new laws would have to be enacted. There wouldn't have to be new regulations enacted. Just simply start prosecuting these companies that practice this or force them to adapt. And the good players would find a way to adapt. The problem with the bad players would be quickly eliminated. And that's something that I'm really starting to work on bringing the FTC's attention to.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, very interesting. Well, David, I'm going to say I think we have enough content for this to be able to call it a successful radio show. Thanks for being here. We'll put this up on Building Fortunes Radio. You'll find it in the MLM After Hours segment, and we always appreciate your participation. And next week we'll have Roger Van Vlissingen, if he could make it, tell us about what's happening with that senator over in New York and their open meeting and open invitation. So for all those people that are listening in, you can probably find something on MLM.news. We haven't posted it yet because I just got the article, but we'll put it on MLM.news so you'll see. And if you happen to be in New York and you want to show up and kind of be an active reporter or investigator, if you will, a set of eyes that say, hey, this is what happened. I just happened to be in town and plugged in. I thought this would be interesting for the industry. Make sure you do that for us. Okay, on that note, we are done with our radio show. David Ritchie, thanks for being here. Do you have any contact information you want to give out for anybody that might be interested in contacting you?
Sure. First of all, thank you for allowing me to be on your show. It's an opportunity that I really value. Secondly, I have an email address for anybody who would like to contact me that I'm happy to receive email on. It is Dave, D-A-V-E, at scam with two M's, S-C-A-M-M, .org. Scam's the acronym for Stop Consumer Abuses by Multi-Level Marketing.
There we go.
The other reference I'd like to give you is to the short written version of my story that's on a nonprofit website. Can I give that out?
Absolutely. Give out all the information you want.
If you Google 10 promises, 10 is in the metal, 10 promises, and real scam, and if you plug that into a Google search box, that'll take you to one of the 6 parts of my story. I would encourage everyone to start with part 1 and read all the way through part 6, because part 6 really brings home what fraudsters in this industry can do and what we can do to counter it. So that the website is realscam, REALSCAM with one M.com.
Perfect. Okay, good. Thanks for being here, everyone.
10 is in the metal. 10 promises.
10 promises. Perfect. Okay, good. All right, thanks for everybody being here. David, thank you very much. Hopefully you'll be able to come back next week.
You've been listening to Building Fortunes Radio on buildingfortunesradio.com. Thanks for listening. Be sure to check us out every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for the designated Building Fortunes Radio segment with Peter Mingils. Be sure to check out the buildingfortunesradio.com website for our featured segments. It's been our privilege to have you listen in. At Building Fortunes Radio, we wish you the success you deserve and are willing to work for. So spread the word, tell a friend, join our newsletter, and go make a difference in your world.